Okay, this video we will be going through the 5.08 discussion and the 5.09 lesson War and Riches. But first of all, looking at the 5.08 discussion, it is called Wagons West, and there are a few points here. If you had been a pioneer living in Illinois, Kentucky, or Tennessee in the late 1840s, would you have gone west to settle there? Why or why not, and briefly describe what you would have experienced on the trip. And to make this a really exciting post, there are a few different things that you could bring up. If you go back to prior lessons, you could write something about maybe you went on the Oregon Trail and what were some experiences you might find there. Maybe you were going on the Santa Fe Trail to go to the American Southwest. What were some differences there? Perhaps you want to put yourself in the shoes of a Mormon going to Salt Lake City. You could write about those types of experiences you may have experiences you experienced. Or you could also think about going to California. Maybe you were inspired by John Fremont's book and you wanted to go to California, and you can describe what that would have been like moving out to California during this time. Make sure that you're accurate to the time period. Remember, this is the late 1840s, so we're not talking about the California gold rush yet at this time. We haven't gotten to that. We'll get to that soon, but that shouldn't be part of this post. You can also, if you'd rather, we'll be doing this in a Class Connect, so you can also participate if you get to the Class Connect and want to participate to the class discussion. You can forego doing this discussion post as well, unless you hear differently from your teachers. Okay, so that was the 5.08 discussion. Make sure to get full credit that you also respond to a classmate in a quality post. Just bringing something up to move the discussion further along, rather than just I agree or nice job. Okay, now we are going to the 5.09 lesson, War and Riches. After Texas became an independent republic in 1836, Americans flocked to the Lone Star Republic in ever-increasing numbers. Traders carried goods to and from the Southwest along the Santa Fe Trail. Settlers made the long and arduous journey to Oregon and Utah along trails that mountain men had blazed decades earlier. It appeared that the United States was fulfilling its manifest destiny. Remember, their God-given destiny to settle the United States from shore to shore. It appeared but a large swath of land still belonged to Mexico. In 1845, President James Polk took office and prepared to undertake the largest expansion of American territory since Louisiana Purchase. His actions would become controversial to the American public. Goals for this lesson include: recognize the arguments for and against going to war with Mexico, identify the major outcomes of the Mexican-American War, and trace the territorial expansion of the United States between 1824 and 1853. And we have to read these pages, 379 through 387. And let's look at the reading guide for this lesson. We're going to be looking at just kind of acquainting ourselves with things we're going to be reading about. Which Democrat was elected president in 1844 and has eyes set on territorial expansion? Just from the introduction, we know that's James K. Polk. We know that Mexico owned a lot of this land that we're currently being contested: California, Nevada, Utah, so forth, Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, Wyoming. Here's another timeline. You have to put events in sequence in the right order. Here's a question about the controversial reasons for going to war. Here are arguments where you're going to fill out for and against war with Mexico. Talking about what happened in California and outcomes of the Mexican War. And then the California Gold Rush. We do get to the California Gold Rush in this lesson. And I'm going to backpedal a minute. I'm going to say you can write about the California Gold Rush in your discussion post. I know if you were listening, I said don't do that, but it does say late 1840s, and it was 1849, so I guess it does include. So you can also make that as part of your discussion post if you want to write about the California Gold Rush. So why not, right? That can be acceptable as well. So now let's go to page 379. And we're going to start with Polk's expansionist agenda. Through the presidential administrations of Democrat Martin Van Buren and Whig John Tyler, Democrats, particularly Southern Democrats, clamored for the annexation of Texas. The new state would expand the land available for cotton cultivation and ensure greater clout for slave states in the federal government. Some Northern Democrats endorsed annexation as well. They saw Texas, as well as Oregon, an outlet for overcrowding in the Northeast. Polk and the annexation of Texas. In 1844, the Democrats nominated James K. Polk, a former congressman and governor of Tennessee, as their presidential candidate. He was up against the well-known Whig Henry Clay. Who is James K. Polk, asked many. A protege of Andrew Jackson, Polk was nicknamed named Young Hickory, and was firmly committed to the annexation of Texas. He also wanted to acquire the whole of Oregon country up to the 5440 North Parallel, part of which was claimed by Britain, which gave rise to his campaign slogan, 5440 or fight! Given the widespread support for annexing Texas, particularly in the South, Henry Clay had to modify his former opposition to territorial expansion. As long as expansion could be accomplished without dishonor, without war, with the common consent of the Union, and upon just and fair terms, Clay said, then he would be glad to see Texas enter the United States. Polk narrowly won the election, but days before he took the oath of office in 1845, the outgoing President John Tyler convinced Congress to pass a resolution inviting Texas to join the Union. Tyler then signed the measure into law, depriving Polk of the opportunity to take the credit for annexation. When Polk became president, Britain claimed part of Oregon and Mexico, still possessed present-day California, Nevada, and Utah, and parts of present-day Colorado, Arizona, New Mexico, and Wyoming. With one eye on Oregon and the other on northern Mexico, the new commander-in-chief prepared to undertake the largest expansion of American territory since the Louisiana Purchase. Declaring war on Mexico. On the highly symbolic day of July 4th, 1845, and why is that symbolic? July 4th is the American independence, the day the Declaration of Independence was signed. America's birthday. Okay. On the highly symbolic day of July 4th, the Texas Congress voted to accept America's offer of annexation. In response, President Polk ordered thousands of U.S. soldiers to cross the Nueces River and patrol against a possible Mexican attack. Before Texan independence, the Nueces was the southernmost border of the Texas District. But Santa Anna's treaty with Sam Houston recognized the Rio Grande as the southernmost border of Texas. Inevitably, Texas and Mexico disputed the narrow area between the two rivers. Though no legal settlement had been reached on the disputed territory, Polk ordered General Zachary Taylor to claim it as U.S. land. In response, on April 24, 1846, a Mexican force crossed the Rio Grande and engaged in a skirmish with some of Taylor's men. 11 American soldiers were killed in the fighting. Hostilities may now be considered as commenced, Tyler informed Polk. An Army officer on the scene recorded in his diary, "We have not one particle of right to be here. It looks as if the government sent a small force on purpose to bring a war, so as to have a pretext for taking California and as much of the country as it chooses." Historians have debated Polk's decision to occupy the disputed territory between the Nueces and the Rio Grande. Many believe it was a calculated attempt to provoke Mexico into war. Polk had spent the better part of 1845 trying to convince Mexico to sell California and the New Mexico territories to the United States. When then those efforts failed, the president became determined to win the territory through armed conflict. In a message to Congress on May 11, 1846, Polk claimed that Mexico had invaded our territory and shed American blood upon the American soil. He asked for a formal declaration of war because of the long-continued and unaddressed wrongs and injuries committed by the Mexican government on citizens of the United States to their persons and property. Polk's ultimate goal was not simply a secure border. He hoped for California, New Mexico, and perhaps some of the other northern provinces of Mexico. Few Americans doubted that the Mexican-American War was a contest for control of the continent. A Washington newspaper described the conflict as the road to California and added, in the spirit of manifest destiny, "Who will stay the march of our Western people?" Opposition to the war. Not all Americans were enthusiastic about Mr. Polk's war. Many Whigs accused Polk of aggressive empire building. They also saw the Mexican-American War as an attempt by Southern Democrats to spread slavery in the United States. The abolitionist Frederick Douglass condemned the war as disgraceful. In Washington, D.C., a first-time Whig congressman from Illinois, wait for it, guess who it might be, introduced a resolution demanding that the president prove the first drops of American blood had in fact been shed on American, not Mexican soil. If he can or will not do this, declared Representative Abraham Lincoln, then I shall be fully convinced of what I more than suspect already, that he is deeply conscious of being in the wrong, that he feels the blood of this war, like the blood of Abel, is crying to heaven against him. Lincoln denounced President Polk as a bewildered, confounded, and miserably perplexed man. Those are some strong words. In Massachusetts, the transcendentalist writer Henry David Thoreau refused to pay his taxes since he believed those taxes would help fund an immoral war. He was promptly arrested and briefly jailed. The episode inspired the powerfully reasoned tract Civil Disobedience, in which Thoreau declared that the government is best which governs not at all. Witness the present Mexican-American War, the work of comparatively few individuals using government as their tool. Technically, the taxes that Thoreau had refused to pay were state that was an excerpt from Civil Disobedience. I'm trying to find the rest of our paragraph here. They were state, not federal taxes, and thus would not have gone directly to the war effort. His statement on civil disobedience, though little noted in his time, has proven a lasting inspiration to the present day, and that will be brought up again throughout history, and most notably during the civil rights period of the 1950s and 1960s. But now, moving on, waging war in Mexico and California. Waging war in Mexico and California. From the start of the Mexican-American War, the United States held the advantage. While the vast and sparsely populated territory in dispute was Mexican, few Mexican settlers lived there. Instead, most of the inhabitants came from the United States. After years of unstable government, Mexico was deeply in debt. The United States had a stronger army, more resources, and the ability to fund the fight. Seizing the offensive, President Polk ordered a blockade of Mexico's east coast. He sent General Zachary Taylor across the Rio Grande to the city of Monterrey. In September of 1846, after heavy fighting, the Americans broke through the city walls and took control of Monterrey. Anybody want a cat, by the way? He's quite entertaining, isn't he? Okay, bye, Pickles. Moving deeper into central Mexico, Taylor's men occupied the town of Salito. There his force of 4,500 men set up a defensive perimeter in anticipation of a counterattack by a 15,000-man Mexican force commanded by none other than General Santa Anna. Though the Americans were greatly outnumbered, they repelled the Mexican assault. Santa Anna ordered a retreat, and Taylor became a national hero. Taylor remained in Mexico until mid-1847, then returned to the United States for a career in politics that ultimately took him to the presidency. Hundreds of miles away in California's Sacramento Valley, several thousand American settlers had already declared California independent from Mexico. In June 1846, they declared themselves a free nation nicknamed the Bear Flag Republic, after the new flag, which bore a single star in the image of a grizzly bear. The rebels were aided by Captain John C. Fremont, who brought a unit of American soldiers into the region. Soon Commodore John D. Sloat arrived with a squadron of American Navy ships and established American control of two American ports, Monterey and San Francisco. Sloat declared California annexed to the United States. Down came the Bear flag and up went the American flag. While Fremont and Sloat led the charges in California and Zachary Taylor's forces cut a swath through central Mexico, Colonel Stephen Watts Kearny led a force of 1,400 soldiers from Fort Leavenworth, Kansas to Santa Fe. His orders were to establish control over the New Mexico territory, a task he completed by mid-August 1846. Leaving the bulk of his force behind, Kearny then applied a squadron to Los Angeles, where he helped Sloat and Fremont defeat scattered Mexican forces in the area. After Los Angeles fell in January 1847, the United States controlled all of California.